All right, so I'm not going to be putting on the lab apron because I'm just going to wear my lab coat from work. Those of you that had me for Bio1, you might remember seeing me. I wear the lab coat all the time, so it makes me feel better. Makes me feel like back in the groove. But this is going to be where my lab setup is going to be for microbiology, and I just retrieved most of the items out of our box that I thought I might need for this particular day one experiment. And mostly what we're going to be doing today is simply rehydrating our bacterial cultures. So I did get out my forceps because I think I'm going to have to use them to pry off the caps of the cultures. First and foremost, we would have washed our hands. I prefer not to wear gloves when I'm handling the microbes, but if you are more comfortable wearing the gloves, I believe there's 10 pairs in each, or sorry, 5 pairs in each little bag, so you should have more than enough to do your lab. I, however, have washed my hands thoroughly and am ready to go. That's all right, I'll just put a pair of gloves on. I had my test tube rack out. I did get my cultures out so that they had a chance to get to room temperature, as well as the tubes that I'm going to use to rehydrate the cultures. That came in in this little bag that has the apparatus set for the microquick cultures. So you're going to need your bacteria, which for the first 2 labs out of this container, you're going to grab just the Serratia marcensis and Micrococcus luteus. Those are the 2 bacteria that you're going to need, the Serratia and the Micrococcus. So we're going to put those on the lab bench. I'm going to put those over to the side because I have not yet cleaned off my lab bench. I do want to get my test tubes out, however, though, and pop them into a test tube rack. Your test tube racks, you need to assemble them. They were in your box. Now, I would also encourage you to label these. I'm a big fan of the Sharpie, not the China marker that's in your kit. So I'm going to label one of my tryptic soy broth cultures. I'm going to label that one Serratia. Make sure I spelled it correctly. And the other one, Micrococcus. Now, I'm also going to take a moment, 2 seconds here, to loosen these caps so that when I reach for them, they are loose and ready to use. Now, you're going to need a bleach solution. So there's a demonstration of making the bleach solution. I just have some distilled water from the grocery store that I'm going to put in here, and it's an approximation. So we're going to fill water to about 180 milliliters, and then we're going to add 20 milliliters of bleach. I'm not sure. I don't think you guys yours came with a 150, 60, 70, 80. So I'm going to get rid of a tiny bit of this. I have a little extra. Pop. I don't think yours came with a graduated cylinder, but I would just be very careful using the bleach. I'm going to fill it up to the 200 mark. And I know beakers aren't that accurate, but it's what we have. And as in the video, she says just swirl it around a little bit like this. So go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to clean off my work surface before I get started. I should have done that first, and I'll encourage you to do that first every time. However, today, since I wanted to go over making that bleach solution with you just real fast, I didn't clean the surface off before I began. She suggests in the Carolina videos pouring a little bit of the bleach solution onto your countertop like that, and then wiping it with a rag, or I'm using paper towel, and then leaving the surface wet for 2 minutes, she suggests. That's a little more than we normally would in the lab, so I'm going to wipe my surface down. Please be sure that you're using a surface that can withstand the bleach. Okay, I have this. Our house was originally a 2-family, so I have this half-second kitchen left on the 2nd floor, so that's what I'm going to use for my laboratory. But I realize many of you might be using a bathroom counter or your kitchen counter. All right, now we have these little paraffin burners. I'm going to take the cap off of mine. I haven't tried to light it yet, but I'm going to light it with my that I use to light my grill, basically. Hopefully it will light pretty easily, quickly. There we go. Aside, you can see a little flame. That's going to be the flame that we're going to use for flaming our containers. I'm going to start with the Serratia. You have to, there's a little, it's like a medical vial, and there's directions on there. You have to pop it open. I don't have super strong fingernails, so I'm going to use my forceps here to try to get this cap off. And I can see that it's not going to be super easy. Maybe I should have waited to light my flame. I don't know how long that's going to last, and we're going to need to use it for all of our labs. So I'll have to edit this part out of the video, but let's see. I should be all right. Difficult if I can't even get the lids off. Of course, in the video that's on the Carolina site, she already has the metal portion removed, so that, here we go. So I got that. And there's a little arrow on the lid, so you want to follow the arrow directions. There we go. Got it open. Like I said, I'm using the forceps because I don't have super strong fingernails, and I don't want to break them, and this is attached pretty securely. There, that one I got a little bit better. So where's my camera here? So if you lift, there's an arrow on the top of the lid, and if you lift from the side there, and then you can get your forceps underneath and pull that metal tab. You need to get that little piece that I'm pulling down. You need to remove that before you can remove the cap. So I'm going to remove those and set those aside. And if you hurry like I am, and you don't have the whole 15 minutes to let your tubes, your broth tubes, get to room temperature, what we commonly do in the lab when they come out of a cold room or the refrigerators, we just hold them in our hands for a few minutes to warm them up and give them a couple of shakes so that it's not too much of a shock for the bacteria. So when I swirl them around, I'm going to get in the habit of swirling rather than shaking. This doesn't make as many bubbles and it won't leak. I'll swirl it around and feel that it feels like closer to body temperature. Okay, so I've cleaned my surface. I have my test tube rack at the ready. I have my 2 vials on a stable countertop. We're going to use these sterile pipettes that came in your kit. There are plenty of them, so you'll have plenty to use for all of your experiments. So I'm just going to relight my little burner here. Yeah, those feel pretty good. So I'm going to be sure I get my tube that's labeled Serratia, and I have my test tube that's labeled Serratia. I'm going to move the microcartons to the back of my rack here. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove the cap. I would tap, make sure that all of your bacteria is down at the bottom of the tube. And then they recommend, notice how I'm grabbing the cap with the pinky of my dominant hand, recommend flaming the top of your tube. That means to put it right into the fire. Mine went out, so we're going to have to adjust that. We're going to grab a full milliliter, just all the way up just below the bulb. I'm going to put the cap back on my tube. See how I'm turning the tube, not the cap, and I'm placing it down in my test tube rack. And then I'm going to put that full milliliter of media into my bacterial culture. And you see how I'm squeezing the pipette bulb and pressing it down. So I'm drawing it up and sucking it back down so that the bacteria gets well mixed. And I think you can see that that's pretty well mixed in there. Now I do need a disposal solution, and I know they recommend alcohol. I don't have any handy, so I am going to pour a little bit of bleach into my container here. And actually, I'm just going to leave this pipette in there. I believe they ask you to let that sit for how many minutes? I'm so against all that. Disinfect. Slide the metal band off, rubber stopper, and mix gently. Okay, we don't say how long to leave it. Warm area. Okay. All right, so we're just gonna let them sit for a minute while I need a little bit taller wick, I think, on my burner here. So let's see if I can relight this. It's half the battle. At least I don't have to use a Bunsen burner thing, right? Okay. So as soon as your culture is mixed, and that it's turbid and cloudy like this. So again, I'll show you up close. Right? So it's nice and turbid. This is what it looked like when it was still lyophilized. So now I'm going to tip my jar and I'm going to squeeze my pipette bulb before I put it under the surface because I do not want a lot of air bubbles. And I'm just going to suck as much as I can of my culture out. And I'm going to put it back into the same tube that I withdrew the broth. And like I said in the video, she shows flaming, so I'm going to try to flame that again. Just running the top of the cap area around in my flame. And I'm going to squirt that into my culture tube, to my triptych, and I'm going to fill my pipette a few times. All right, to get that all the way in there. And then I'm going to pop that into my bleach, secondary bleach container there. That should be isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to flame the top of my tube. Now it's important, the caps are plastic, so I would flame that and give it 5 or 10 seconds before I put the cap on. And we want the cap to close it all the way tightly and then back it off almost a whole turn because we want the cap to be loose enough that the bacteria can get some air, some oxygen. So I'm going to mix it a little bit. I'm going to pop it back into my rack and I'll come back tomorrow and check on both of these. I'm not going to go through all the words again, but I'll let you guys watch me. I'm going to set up the other one. It is very important that I use a clean, sterile pipette. And remember, when you open these pipettes, you want to open them on the bulb end, not the tip, because you want the tip to remain sterile. Okay, so I've already removed the metal band on this one. I would do both of them before you start. I'm going to remove my pipette. Again, we want to flame the top. These should be sterile, so I really shouldn't have to do this, but I'm going to remove a milliliter of broth. I'm going to put the cap back on. Place it gently down the rack. You want to place it gently, not let it fall into the rack because it will, so now I'm going to resuspend. Right. Gently, very gently. You want to do this gently. Don't suck it up super quickly because not only the air bubbles, but you can actually damage the bacteria. Some of them are a little bit fragile. They don't like to be vigorously pipetted. So see, I'm doing that nice and slowly and not using too much force. And we're going to let those guys sit for maybe a minute or so. In the meantime, I am planning on myself. I'm going to take a little bit of my waste bleach and put it right into my tube here, my original tube. Shake it up so I kill any bacteria that might have been left in there. As I mentioned, it looks as though we have plenty of bacteria, so I'm not going to let them sit any longer. I'm just going to suck them right back up into my pipette. Twist it off with my pinky. Flame the top of my tube. Helps us practice our aseptic technique that we're going to learn more details of tomorrow. And then I'm going to squirt my sample back into the tube, into the broth tube. It's best if you don't put your pipette all the way down in there in case you've accidentally contaminated it. I did put it inside the mouth, but the the least amount of the pipette that you can put in there, the better. And I'm going to flame this again because I've been standing here talking. Next, I'm killing all the bacteria that might be entering from the air. Pop my pipetter into my alcohol solution. And then I'm going to close the cap. And remember, I'm going to tighten it down and then I'm going to unscrew it so that it gives it a little rattle like that. And again, I'm going to shake, swirl, I should say. I'm going to swirl my culture. And then I'm going to place it right next to my other culture. And I'm going to let them incubate until tomorrow. And then tomorrow when we come back, we will practice isolation. And then the next day we'll do streaking for, we'll do aseptic transfer, and then we'll streak for isolation, and then we'll do gram stains. So see you tomorrow.